All right, here we go. Welcome back to Shock's Talks. I'm Shakti and this is my channel. I wanted to start off by showing you a really cute present that I got from a friend. My new Flextra terrestrial socks. I love them. Okay, so today in this series, I'm sharing some significant UFO events beginning in the 1940s and leading up to current events. We might go further back in time at some point, and eventually we'll be digging into consciousness and the nature of reality, because you can't talk about this stuff without getting into that eventually. But for now, we're on the topic of UFOs and whoever makes and operates them. I'm trying to do a quick catch up and provide context for all those who might not have been following these stories all along. Talking about UFOs has been considered fringe for a long time, but we might be at the end of that phase of reality, or at least I really hope we are. One thing you might hear podcaster and documentary filmmaker Jeremy Corbell say a lot is, this is only new news if you haven't been paying attention. He's talking about the fact that most people are not tuned into this aspect of reality, and I think it's important for as many of us as possible to get with the program, so to speak. For lots of people, UFOs and aliens are still just funny or sci-fi concepts, irrelevant to their daily lives, and that, in combination with the active disinformation campaigns and stigma around the topic, makes it inaccessible to some and even too scary to contemplate for others. If there's anything we've learned from the July 26 hearing, it's that UFOs or UAPs are most definitely real. Sightings are routine. Better systems for reporting are needed. Pieces of technology have been retrieved and analyzed since as far back as the 1930s. Secrecy has been an issue. The stigma must be dissolved in order to build a bigger picture understanding. UAPs are considered a national security concern. And the US government, as well as NASA, private companies, and defense contractors, might be keeping secrets about these quote-unquote objects and advanced technologies. Moreover, they may have information about whatever or whoever was found inside, and we all want to know. I have been reading about this stuff for over a decade now, and there's still so much I'm learning every single day. This topic is full of detailed reports, accounts. There are numerous books, organizations, movies, documentaries, and podcasts, but I find that there is often a sensational layer placed upon this content. Sorry for the dog barking in the background if you can hear it. So I find that there's often like a layer of sensationalism placed on top of these things. Ominous music, flashy images, and even some silliness that may grab attention but doesn't do a whole lot to legitimize the study of UFOs and what we call aliens. In episodes 1 through 3, I started by recapping Kenneth Arnold's story from 1947. Then we talked about the Roswell crash that occurred less than a month after, and some sightings from the 1950s in the US, as well as the momentous July 26, 2023 hearing. All of these episodes have been focused on credible reports of the craft, but we have yet to dive deep into the question, who are the pilots operating UAPs, and what are they doing here? You can't get into the topic of UFOs without at least considering the stories of experiencers and abductees, along with the whistleblowers and pilots. These are overlooked by some because they cannot be proven with sensor data and are probably mostly subjective experiences. However, contact is happening, and it's a multifaceted phenomena. The more work we can do to reduce stigma around these sharings, the more science can be done around things like implants that have been removed from people's bodies. Healing and psychological aftercare can be provided to those who have suffered emotional and mental stress from being taken. Abductees could be tested for radiation, given brain and body scans, and maybe even monitored over time. To put it plainly, a lot is going on, and it ranges from ecstatic to traumatic. Some of what goes on looks like the science we do on animals here on Earth, extracting samples and embedding tracking devices. Some appear to be attempts at communication. A lot of stories are about healings and what people call upgrades, and of course, there's going to be always those attention seekers who are making up wild tales for whatever they get out of it. We're looking at crop circles, animal mutilations, abductions, positive contact experiences, healings, telepathic downloads, and even contact through dreams. Today, we're going to continue down our timeline of major events by taking a look at the famous abduction of Betty and Barney Hill. This occurred on September 19th, 1961. First, I'm just going to read you their bio straight from Wikipedia, and then we'll get into the story. The Hills lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Barney was employed by the United States Postal Service, while Betty was a social worker. Active in the local Unitarian congregation, the Hills were also members of the NAACP and community leaders, and Barney sat on a local board of the United States Commission on Civil Rights. They were an interracial couple at a time when it was particularly uncommon in the United States. Barney was black and Betty was white. So, it's about 10:30 p.m. They're driving home from a vacation. Betty sees a bright light in the sky that looks like a shooting star but is moving upward. They stop the car to walk the dog and take a closer look. They see a craft in the sky, and Barney figures it's a plane, while Betty is thinking flying saucer, and soon it zooms towards them. They keep driving and observing this craft, which is moving erratically and comes very close. At one point, the craft flies overhead and then down towards them, causing Barney to stop in the middle of the highway. It was silent and hovered above them. At first, they basically just remembered driving on, but there was a lot of weird aftermath. They had missing time, fuzzy memories, their watches never worked again, a binocular strap was mysteriously broken. Barney felt compelled to examine his genitals after, but nothing seemed wrong. They felt the need to take showers when they got home in case of any contamination from seeing the craft, but they did not remember what had occurred other than the sighting, so then they both drew pictures of the saucer or disc. A few other details from after: Betty's dress was torn. There was a pink powder on it that later blew away when she hung it on the clothesline. And that dress was also later analyzed in labs, although I don't have any information on where that was or what they found. And there was a report of concentric circles on the car that made a compass needle go crazy when they brought it close. On October 21st, 1961, they did a 6-hour-long interview with a member of NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena at the time. And Barney felt he had some mental blocks around what had occurred. 10 or so days later, Betty started having weird, vivid dreams for 5 days in a row. In them, she starts seeing what happened, and later, the two decide to undergo hypnotic regression. They have separate sessions, and they are consistent with one another. So you can find recordings of the hypnotic regressions online. I dropped a couple of links below for 2 that I found, and I'll just warn you, it is a little disturbing to hear the fear in their voices. They were returned safely, and whatever this experience was, it always makes me think about the science we humans do on animals without their consent, not to mention the breeding and slaughter of animals for consumption. The following is my summary of Betty's abduction memory from the hypnosis recording. They take a sharp turn and go down a dirt road. They see some men in the road and they are afraid. They see a fiery orb. She's asking Barney if they're being robbed or if there's an accident. Betty is terrified. She says the men are in uniform. Barney is walking, but he's asleep. She tries to wake him, but he doesn't pay any attention. A man tells her they want to do some tests and that they won't be harmed. She said only one man spoke, and he had like kind of a foreign accent. She said they came to a clearing in the woods. So just to go back a little, they were stopped kind of in the middle of the highway at one point in their memory block. There was a point at which they drove down a dirt road, and then they ended up walking into the woods. So the object from the sky was on the ground in the clearing, and they're taking her up some kind of ramp. She doesn't want to go up. The people are saying things like, "You won't be harmed. There's nothing to be afraid of." She doesn't feel safe. She kicks one. It tears her dress. They take her into an examining room on the craft. She sees them taking Barney into another room. The crew only stays for a minute. The man who speaks English is there for a second, and then this examiner or doctor comes in. He tells her to take off her dress, but before she can, he's unzipping it, and then she's naked in the middle of the room. There's a table, and she lays down on her back. They bring over really long needles, and each one has a wire running from it. The examiner has a long needle in his hand, bigger than anything she's ever seen, any needle she's ever seen. She asks what he's going to do with it, and he says he's going to do a simple test and put it in her navel. She doesn't like this. She's protesting and feeling pain. She asks him to stop. And then the leader, not the doctor, comes and puts his hand over her eyes and says she'll be all right and she won't feel it. And at that moment, all the pain goes away. When she asks what the test was, the examiner says it was a pregnancy test. And she's like, this is not like any other pregnancy test. Like, she kind of doesn't believe it. The examiner leaves, but the leader stays there. She was grateful to the leader because he had stopped her pain. She felt no fear at all now, and so she starts talking to him. They're still in the same room. She said most people don't know that he exists or that he's even alive, and she needs proof. He laughs and asks what kind of proof she would like. She asked for something to take back with her, and he told her to look around the room and pick something. So she finds a large book on a cabinet. She asks for it, and the leader laughed and asked if she thought she could read it. And then she laughed and said no, but she wanted it for proof. And he says okay, and she's delighted. So then he goes back to the table and kind of does something that opens up some compartment in the wall. And he pulls out a map, a star map, and it's an oblong map. He asks if she's ever seen anything like it before, and she hasn't. He says the heavy lines on it are the trade routes, the solid lines were places they went occasionally, and the broken lines were expeditions. She asked where his home port was, and then he basically says, well, where are you on this map? And she has no idea. So he kind of laughs, saying, like, there's no point in me showing you where I am if you don't even know where you are. And then she feels really stupid for not knowing where Earth was on the map. And he rolls up the map and puts it back away. She wants him to show her where Earth is, but at that point, he just laughs. She starts looking through the book, and then there's like a little noise and agitation out in the hallway, and all these men or beings, whatever she calls them, men, they come back in. And they're all kind of like excited about something, and she's worried like something happened to Barney. She asks them, and the examiner from before starts looking in her mouth and tugging at all of her teeth, just like pulling on them, but not in a very hard way. And he couldn't figure out how Barney's teeth gave out and hers didn't. And then she laughs because Barney had dentures, and so she has to explain what that is. And then towards the end, she tries to figure out a way for the leader to come back. She really wants to create a scenario where, you know, he can meet other people of importance on Earth. And, you know, he kind of says, like, it's not up to me, but I'll discuss it. And then she's concerned about, like, how are you going to find me again? And at that point, he basically says, don't worry, we can find you. We always do. We always do find those we want to. She asks what he meant, and he just laughed. Now, Barney's coming, and his eyes are still closed, and some of the other men, not the leader, they're talking, and they're undecided about something. And this is at the point that they're exiting the craft, and they're about to get escorted back to their car. And basically, the leader has to come and take the book away from her. She's really upset, and she's like, you promised me, what is this all about? And he says, it's not up to me. They don't agree with you having it. And she kind of makes a big deal about how she needs proof, and he's like, don't worry, you're not going to remember anything. And she's like, yes, I will remember this forever. And he says, you'll be better off if you don't. And then he apologizes for not letting her have the book. And she says, all right, I won't be mad at you. So now we're rewinding back to the car. We're going to talk about Barney's experience. And this is his recall of his experience under hypnosis. He remembers feeling afraid. He gets his gun. He's looking through the binoculars up at the craft above the car. He sees a man looking at him. The craft to him looks like a giant pancake with rows of windows and one huge light, and he's totally in disbelief. He makes a big point about how Betty kind of maybe believed in flying saucers, but he didn't at all. So he's having a really hard time processing. You can tell when he's talking about it that that's a big part of his experience, is just like, this can't be real, like pinching himself and all that kind of stuff. So one person he sees looks friendly, and he's looking at Barney over his right shoulder and smiling, and that person has a round face. He's up on the craft, and it makes him think of a redheaded Irish man. He's not sure why, but then he thinks it's because Irish people, in his experience, were often hostile to Black people, and so this strikes him as out of the ordinary. And then he describes an evil face that to him looks like a German Nazi. He says he has on a uniform, black with a black scarf around his neck. He also mentions that the Irish-looking man had slanted eyes, but not like any earthly human slanted eyes. Barney says the creature, the leader, is telling him something. He says he can see it in his face. His lips aren't moving, and he's telling him, stay there and just keep looking. Just keep looking. Just keep looking. Barney wants to pull his goggles away, but he can't. He's freaking out. He's praying to God for strength and wants to get away. He's really afraid of the eyes, and it seems like he continues to experience the eyes almost as if they're pressed up against his eyes or like in his mind, kind of. He said the only the one looking over his shoulder was friendly, but the leader was terrifying to him, and everyone moved away when the leader came. He had a black shiny jacket and a scarf. Barney went back into the car. The craft was still there. He feels something in his brain, and then he's in the woods, and the dog is in the car still. He sees men with black jackets, wonders if they're being robbed. The eyes are there, telling him to not be afraid. There's that same thing Betty saw, a bright orange and red light down the road glowing, and the men in the road, they won't talk to him at all. And then he's going up an incline. He's afraid to open his eyes, so he keeps his eyes closed the whole time, and he's telling himself to keep his eyes closed, or maybe he's hearing a voice that's telling him to keep his eyes closed. It sounds a little confusing to me in the recording. And so then he does say a man told him to keep his eyes closed, and that was the one he saw through the binoculars, but not the men in the road. He gets carried up. He realizes his fly is open. There's some kind of cup over his genitals. He's on a table. He thought if he kept quiet and still, he won't be harmed and it will be over. And then he's guided back to the car. He reaches down to feel for his dog. His dog is in a tight ball, curled up under the seat. Betty is returning also. She gets into the car, and they're both just grinning at each other. And it sounds like they're almost euphoric at this point. They're really happy that they made it. He's thinking, this isn't too bad. How funny. I had no reason to fear. They see a bright moon, and they laugh, and they say, there it goes. So, like I said, there are links to some of the recordings below, and I just suggest if you're going to listen to it, make sure you do it in a time where you can process it, because it's very emotional. And I also suggest listening to the whole Betty recording from beginning to end, because it sounds really dramatic towards the beginning, and you often just hear clips replayed from that portion, but then it gets a little calmer towards the end when she's just talking to the leader, and I think that's very interesting. And then, yeah, I just wanted to say that, like, these are only a few among thousands of experience or stories out there. And remember, these stories range from peaceful contact and even miraculous healings all the way to traumatic abduction and everything in between. The famous cases that get a lot of attention tend to be the scarier ones, but if you want to absorb some more neutral to positive content, I highly recommend the podcast Aliens and Artists. It's full of interesting interviews and focuses on the link between creativity and contact. It's really fun and well produced, and the creator, Stuart Davis, also co-runs an experiencer group. So if you are an experiencer, this could be a good resource for you, and the links are below. In the next episode, we're going to look more at the experience side of the UFO phenomena. We're going to keep going on this topic and peek into some theories around what it all means. Sometimes learning about all of this can feel really overwhelming and upsetting, so let's take a nice deep breath together and just ground into this moment, if you're willing to do that with me. We are not alone because we have each other. No one I've heard of escapes this life without trauma, so the way I see it, the best we can do is to continue cultivating empathy and love and an ongoing curiosity about all that is beyond our current understanding. Maybe through this process, more solutions can be found for all. Thank you again for taking the time to listen to Shocks Talks, and I really hope to see you again for episode 5.